watching tutorials for...
Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 51 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the Ultrabeat, which is a drum synthesizer, a drum sampler, as well as a step sequencer. It's one of the most versatile drum and sampling instruments in Logic, and it's also one of the easiest ones to use as long as you understand some basic concepts of sequencing and.
Okay, so my problem is I feel like I can tell when most instruments are out of tune, but for some reason I cannot notice when drums are, and that's really bad and really sad. So I need to get better at, well, I just need to check like everything I'm doing and make sure it's being tuned right. Like, I don't really know how to tune drums, and if I'm working with like a sampler or like a piano roll, someone actually let me borrow a MIDI controller, which is super chill, but I still have to the drums still need to be in tune, so that's like a problem I seem to have pretty often. So I think we need a title change too, by the way, but I didn't tell Discord I was going live, so whatever. That's what I'm doing tonight. Check out the great lighting, but no makeup. Yeah, whatever. I have dark circles. I do not care. Like, damn. But the lighting's improved, right? So shout out to that. I do have more lights coming. Well, this one came, but this was not like the important one. This is like a selfie light. But for, I guess, like this other app streams I do, or like sometimes I'll shoot video on my phone. Like, there is use for this, but with my computer being that far away, it doesn't make like the hugest difference. But I'm like, oh, okay, this one came. I ordered like 5 of these and then 3 soft boxes. So yeah, the lighting should improve. I mean, this is already like way better, but I look like crap. Whatever. Okay, let's get back to the tutorial, guys. Yeah, I'm like, my drums need to get back on point. So let's just watch this tutorial. So Music Tech Help Guy, I watch him a lot. I really like the way he breaks down his tutorials. I think he knows what he's talking about, and he explains it in a way that's like very straightforward. And even if you're missing some technical prerequisites, you could easily kind of figure out what he's talking about. I went to school for this, but I'm still like, I'm not like the best in the world at everything, so. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like there were certain things I was going through in school and I didn't pay attention to everything. And I'm so mad at myself for that, because school was a lot of money and I feel like I missed out on some stuff. So filling in those gaps and focusing on drums, because I'm realizing this is like a common issue. I can pull up a tuner and I can solo my tracks. I can look and see that, okay, this drum is not in tune, but I also need to figure out like the easiest way to tune them, because there's a couple plugins that like just come with Logic and they're not that great. So I'm probably going to be getting some like native instrument stuff that has a lot more control. And ideally, just doing stuff with a MIDI controller and playing it in the right key would be super freaking helpful. So that's kind of what I'm doing, I guess, right now. And that's it. So back to the tutorial. And no one's here because I didn't even say I was live, so whatever.
Sampling. There is another sampler in Logic that we'll cover a little later. It's called the EXS24. It's actually even more versatile than Ultrabeat is, but most people favor Ultrabeat for.
Now, they did teach me Ultrabeat in school. Like, we used Logic and Pro Tools. That's pretty much what we used in school. So a lot of like Pro Tools or Logic stuff I'm familiar with, but I'm like, I didn't get certified in any of them. It is so hard to get Pro Tools certified. Like, you really need to know your shit. So, whatever. I'm trying to bridge the gaps on the stuff I'm not so great at. Because someone was like, yo, that's not in tune. I'm like, fuck, you're right. And it's so weird because I'll notice when other instruments aren't in tune, but for whatever reason, drums do not always stand out to me as being in tune or not. So that's kind of bad. So let's fix that. or try to
percussion and drum sounds. So let me just go ahead and open up the Ultrabeat here and my instrument insert. And one thing I want to show you is that kind of like the drummer plugin, you can actually mix it in multi-out. You can actually open up the Ultrabeat here and my instrument insert. And one thing I want to show you is that kind of...
All right, so let's see. All right, I'm going to pull this up because I've had trouble finding it before. So it's an insert, so that's what we're going to use. And some of this is review. Okay, whatever. All right, so this kick is in tune, but it's not, I'm not happy with it. Wait. Nice. Oh, wait, yep. Alistair, before he went to sleep, was playing in here, and I always have to turn the keyboard off because he'll, like, jump on me and hit short keys somehow and, like, mess up the session. Okay, there we go. There's our mix window. Okay, so... Alright, so... Inserts... How annoying. Okay, so, like, but I know I have Ultrabeat on here, but it's not coming up. Okay, where the hell are my inserts? There we go. Yeah, so there's correlation counter tuner. What's cool about Ultrabeat though is you can load stuff and you can like split it. That's kind of cool too. Like I have so many drum packs that are like legit, but I'm like, is this in tune? Is this in tune? Like I have thousands and thousands and thousands of cool drum kits and like individual hits, and I don't know. But there is like a tuner. I should just use that. But then the problem is, say there's a sample sound that I like, but it's not tuned. The problem is tuning it, and I do not like the tuners that seem to come with. I don't know, and I also feel like I'm missing stuff that's supposed to be in the program. So there's a way to check that you have all the stuff that should be in there, and if not, you just like re-download it. Okay, okay, so let's just go back to that.
Like the kind of like the drummer plugin, you can actually mix it in multi-output. You get multiple outputs for it. So there's basically two modes here, stereo or multi-output. We'll get into the multi-output later, but just for now I'm going to use stereo. Now Ultrabeat works just pretty much like any other software instrument. You can play it on your MIDI controller just like any other instrument. The difference is that, of course, it's meant for drums, so each key is going to be a different drum instrument, and the way the notes on the keyboard are laid out is apparent right here, and this kind of thin strip of a keyboard here. The sounds in Ultrabeat start on C1 on the keyboard. So if you're using like a 49 key keyboard or like a, I think like, yeah, like a 49 key keyboard or 61 key keyboard, usually C1 is the bottom C on those. And you can click on these and you'll hear the sound. So you can hear we've got kind of a kick drum there, tom sound, snare sound. And you can, like I said, you can also play this on your MIDI controller. I don't have mine plugged in, so I'm going to go ahead and use the musical typing keyboard, which is Command K. And so let me just go down an octave. So you can play it in like any other instrument. And you can record that way too. You can, you could just simply choose a preset, arm the track, hit record, and just start playing in. I'm not going to do that because I'm going to use the Ultrabeat's built-in sequencing features. First of all, let me just choose a different preset because this one's kind of boring. This is just the default. I'm going to use one under drum kits that is called, let's try Electro Bump. Let's try that one. And so what you'll see is it loads a whole new set of sounds. And each one of these sounds here is, again, it's assigned to a particular key in the keyboard, so you can see what pitch it's associated with. But these blue bars actually aren't there just to look nice. They actually serve a purpose. The blue bar is actually the volume of each voice. So if I want my kick drum here to be a little quieter, I can pull that down. And say I want my snare here to be a little louder, I can pull that up, or maybe my clap. You can also mute or solo each zone or sample or whatever you want to call it, and you can also adjust the pan of each one as well. Okay, so for now, don't worry about all this stuff going on here. These are all like the synthesizer elements of Ultrabeat. We'll talk about some of that later. What I want to get to is the step sequencer. And the way you can view the step sequencer is you can click on this icon on here that says full view. What full view does is it pulls up the full view of the step sequencer. And the step sequencer is very simple. At least, by default, each of these steps in a sequence are a 16th note. So 2 of them would be the length of an 8th note, 4 would be a quarter note, and then the whole step sequencer by default is separated into 8 beats. So each one of these kind of lighter gray lines represents the beginning of a new beat, a new quarter note. So basically we have 2 measures of 4/4 time here. And most of the Ultrabeat presets will come with some stock patterns built into them. So the way you can switch between those patterns is there's a little pattern menu down here, and you can click on that, and you'll see that there are 24 possible patterns that you can save just for this one plugin. Each of the ones that have an SQ next to it means that is a sequence. That means that there is a sequence stored on that pattern. So right now we're on pattern 3, and there's a sequence on it. Now these pitch names here, these are used for in the pattern mode for kind of key switching. You can switch between different patterns just by pressing a key on your keyboard. We'll talk about that later. But let's try pattern 1 instead. And you'll see it loads a slightly different pattern. So how do we play the pattern? Well, you can press spacebar to start and stop it. But that's also going to start and stop your session in the background. So unless you want to audition a pattern with a session in the background, there's no need to do that. You can basically start and stop the sequence just by pressing the play button right here. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try number 8. There we go. Let me just throw a limiter on here because we're clipping pretty bad. There we go. That'll work. All right, so that's just how you can switch between your patterns. Now, let's say you want to make your own pattern. You can either choose one of the blank ones that doesn't have an SQ next to it, or you can kind of clear a pattern. So let's say I want to start on pattern 1. You can just right-click on the pattern menu down here, and you choose clear, and it clears the pattern for you. So now I have a blank pattern to work with. The great thing about step sequencing in here is it allows you to not have to type in notes with MIDI notes and piano roll, and it's a bit easier to work up here for drum patterns. So let me just start building a pattern here. One of the great things about this is you can just press play, let the sequencer roll through, and you can kind of create a pattern on the fly. So let me just create one right now. And actually, there's a little trick I want to show you before I start creating it. if you right-click on any of these lanes here, there's a few options in here. I'm not going to show you all of them, but the two I find that are really useful are add every downbeat and add every upbeat. So if I want to just start with like a basic 4 on the floor kick pattern, you can right-click on the kick lane and say add every downbeat. And then what'll happen is it'll put one on every quarter note. Likewise, you can also choose add every upbeat. So maybe I want to have something, you know, like an open hat on every upbeat. You just choose add every upbeat. And there you go. I'm going to go ahead and re-clear the pattern here once again, because that's not really what I want to do. But let me just create a pattern here. So there we go. It's just in you know, a minute or two, I was able to kind of just put together a, you know, just a basic drum pattern. And one of the other things that you can do to remove, like if you have like a whole series of notes here, of steps in the in your step sequencer, you can actually click to swipe to add them in, and you can also click and swipe in reverse to also take them away. The other thing that I forgot to mention is that there's also a bass instrument. It's not in all of the Ultrabeat presets, but there's usually a bass instrument that goes from middle C and on up. Unfortunately, here you can really only control the note on middle C, but if I really wanted to build a, you know, a bass with this along with my drum pattern, I could always just go and dub that in by playing it in. All right, so that's my pattern. Let's say that I want to copy this pattern over to pattern 2 and then slightly alter it, because I don't want to have to recreate this whole pattern just so I can tweak one little thing. So what I can do is right click on the pattern menu again, say copy this time, go to pattern 2, which is a completely different pattern, right click on that and say paste. And so what that'll do is it'll paste that pattern into this pattern. So this time I don't want a crash cymbal at the beginning. I want just a kind of an open hi-hat. And I'm going to change up the bass a little bit. So change the pattern slightly. Another thing that we can do, let me go, let's do it in this one. Another thing you can do is if you click on any particular lane here, like actually right on the voice over here, or the sample, what you can do is you'll see basically the velocity for all of the notes in that lane down here. And so, you know, when you play a note, when you just click in a note, you're kind of stuck with one velocity. But when you click on it, you can go down here and you can kind of alter the velocity for it. So let's say that on this ticka ticka ta right there, the 16th notes in my my hi-hat, I want that to kind of, grow. I want it to kind of slowly kind of crescendo into a louder note. You can alter the velocity down here. And again, remember, velocity all the way down would be 1, and all the way up is going to be 127.
Now, what's like, okay, so what's cool about this is, this is cool, but like, it's not putting them on individual tracks. So I really... So you see his mixer behind, and what does it say? Ultrabeat, and then output, stereo out, his master fader. So the problem with this is that, yeah, you get like a drum kit, but you have no control over your drums. So like, I really can't even use this. I just need to figure out, I'm going to finish this tutorial because I really like this guy, but I don't think, it's just not the right way to do it. And I like being able to pan my drums out. And I mean, what's cool is, yes, you can mix well, let's see. Okay, so yeah, you can arrange the volume of your drums within Ultrabeat, but it doesn't look like you can pan them. So because of that, I don't think I want to use that. And I remember them showing us, we used it in school for like 2 or 3 weeks. So at one point I was okay at this program, but I don't know. I don't think it's going to be an option for me, but I do like this guy's tutorial, and there is still stuff I can learn from it, so I'm going to finish it. But I don't think this tutorial is actually going to solve my problems. Because I'm realizing, like, yeah, I have cool ideas and stuff, but, like, literally, I think all my drums are out of tune, so that's not cool.
And so basically this blue bar represents the length of the, or not the length, it represents the how loud the velocity is going to.
By the way, this is kind of sketch. Well, it's not because I'm not contracted with anyone, but I have a pretty respectable audience, but it's spread out over so many different apps and stuff. And when I would be contracted, I couldn't like promote other things. So since I'm free of any contracts right now, I'm literally going to be poaching my own audience from other places and trying to get them on YouTube by basically naming my streams on other places, my YouTube channel. I mean, it's totally frowned upon, but if I'm not contracted, there's really not anything they can do. I mean, maybe they can ban my account, but I'm just trying to get more people on YouTube right now. I don't know. I'm so mad at you-know-who because he kind of fucked my IGO contract. Had a lot of followers on there at one point, and a couple, like 2 streams that had like 2 million views. And I honestly think he was just jealous because he didn't have anything going. Now he has his stuff going. But whatever, I need to get back on my thing. And I don't even know if there's an app that I like right now. I think I'm just going to poach my own audience from other places. And I don't know if I'm just going to do YouTube and something else. But my audience is spread out, and I gotta fix that. So if you guys hear me talking to something like random, it's an app. So just so you know. But we're gonna finish this tutorial. But Ultrabeat is not gonna fix my problems. I'm kind of disappointed.
Another thing that we can do is we can control the gate of the notes down here. For my open hi-hat here, let me just solo that out. It only lasts a very short period of time. And some of the sounds, not all of the sounds, but some of the sounds in the presets in Ultrabeat can have their gate altered. And the gate basically is just how long the sound lasts for. So instead of dragging up or down this time, I'm going to drag to the right and extend the length of this note. Yeah, for this one it didn't do anything. So, so there are other sounds where the length of the note may be affected by the gate down here. And actually, I can think of one right now. The bass, for instance, maybe I want this first bass note to kind of last a full quarter note instead of just being a short little 16th note. I'll just pull the gate out on that. Let's give that a shot. Yeah, so now this opens up the floodgates for a whole bunch of different rhythms we can create now. you go. By the way, when you choose a particular voice and its corresponding lane, and you edit the lane down here, you can also add in the steps from down here as well. So I don't know if you saw that, but I added in a step here on 23, and it corresponds to the step that's up here as well. All right, let me go back to the first pattern and just draw out that very first bass note. And in my second pattern, I'm actually going to make this one short again. Okay, so let's say I want to get these patterns down into my song so I can kind of look at it as MIDI data. One approach to this, I'm just going to pull the Ultrabeat off to the side here. One approach to this is to compose whatever it is you want underneath this, and then just hit play, and the Ultrabeat will actually play whatever pattern you have in here, as long as the sequencer power button is turned on here. So if I just hit spacebar to play my session, it's going to play that sequence.
Like, that's, I mean, it is a cool program, but like if you look at his mix session right there, there's only 2 tracks, and you have no control with this, man. Unless you want to load Ultrabeat individually every single time, and that's just like, I mean, I guess that's the only way you can do it. But I just don't think this is going to solve my problems. Like, low key, it's not.
Even though I don't have any MIDI data down here, and there's no MIDI regions or anything. The problem with this is that it's basically going to play pattern 2 continuously. You know, I want pattern 1 and then pattern 2, and I want it to kind of repeat back and forth. So what we need to do to make this work is there's a drag and drop feature, not to be confused with the sampling drag and drop feature, but a sequence drag and drop feature where you can pull your sequence up here down into the arrange window, and it'll create a MIDI region out of it. So let's go back to pattern 1. And the way you do this is there's this little tiny button down here that next to pattern right here. And when you hover over that, it says drag to arrange window. So you just grab that thing, pull it straight down here, and it creates a MIDI region out of the pattern that you have up here. So this was pattern 1. And I'm going to go to pattern 2 and pull that down. There we go, right next to it. So now when I hit play, I'm going to hear pattern 1 and pattern 2. There is one important thing to remember here. Ultrabeat will always play, even if there's MIDI data down here, when you press spacebar, unless you turn the sequencer off. Because we have our patterns already down here as MIDI data, there's no need to have the sequencer on, because otherwise what's going to happen is it's going to play the sequence up here and play the MIDI data down here. So I'm just going to make sure that the sequencer is turned off, close out the plugin window. I'm going to go ahead and just use the text tool here to name my patterns. Let's call this pattern 1, pattern 2. There we go. And then let me just kind of repeat this a couple times, or Command R will repeat a region. So let's just repeat it. I already have it once, or both of these played once, so I'll do it 3 more times. There we go. So now we have this alternating between pattern 1 and pattern 2. Okay, so that sounds okay. I could work that into a song. I could add something else to it. Let's talk about Ultrabeat's. Actually, let's talk about its ability to trigger whole patterns live. I'm not necessarily saying that this is something that you're going to do in a live situation. You can use Ultrabeat live, but it's I'll be honest, most of Logic's instruments pale in comparison to Ableton Live, or just the interface of Ableton Live for live use. So I wouldn't really recommend Logic for live use unless you're just kind of using it as as just a synthesizer, and you've just got a basic MIDI controller and you just need to get sound out of it. It doesn't have the intuitive way of controlling the instruments like Ableton Live does. However, there is a mode in it called pattern mode. What pattern mode does is it lets you trigger whole clips here, whole patterns, based on what note on your MIDI keyboard you're pressing. So earlier I said that when you look at your sequences down here, your patterns, each pattern has a different note number, octave number next to it. So this is not C1, that's actually C-1. So we're talking about the C that is not 1 octave, but 2 octaves lower than this C, which was C1. So you go backwards, C1, C0, C-1. So we're talking...
It's funny how you never listened to your dad when you were a teenager. My dad, he always gave me 2 pieces of advice. One was to always be humble, and the second was to always do the right thing. Now that I'm the new CEO of Uber, I've taken that advice to heart, and I'm using that advice to change a company. Moving forward, we're taking into consideration what's good for our driver partners, our riders, and the cities that we operate in. And it's going to make us a much, much better service.
About keys that are so low that they're not on most keyboards. The whole point of this is that if you have, say, like a beat pad or a trigger pad or something like that on your keyboard or your MIDI controller, you can assign a particular pad to, say, C-1, and then maybe C#-1, then D-1. Keys that you're not necessarily going to play for on the keyboard, but you might trigger them with a beat pad or something like that. So when you press the pad that's assigned to C-1, instead of hearing a note, what you'll actually hear is the whole sequence, the whole pattern that's on C-1. Now, I don't have my MIDI controller connected, so I'm going to go ahead and use the musical typing keyboard, and I'm also going to pull my octaves down into the negative range. So basically my home row will start on C-1. I'll just pull this off to the side here. And as long as pattern mode is on here, if I press the key C-1 on my MIDI controller, or in my case, I'm using the musical typing, it will play the sequence. And if you press it again, it'll stop it. So let's try C#-1. And if I press it again, it stops it. And you can see that it switched to that pattern. And you can go up all of these other patterns. You can go all the way up to, until you run out of sequences on your patterns. Let's try D-1. So the advantage here is that you can kind of trigger these things in real time with a MIDI controller or like an MPC style beat controller, and you can build sort of a live performance out of it. There are 4 pattern modes. With toggle, basically what it does is whenever you play the next key, key trigger, it's going to automatically switch to the next pattern. So if I play C-1 and then play E-1, it's just going to switch in the middle of the pattern. If you want it to switch on step 1, you choose to toggle on step 1. And so what that does is if I play C-1 and then play D-1 or E-1, it won't switch the pattern. It'll play through the rest of this pattern and then switch on beat 1, on step 1. So I'll play C-1, and I'm going to press E-1, and it didn't. There you go. It didn't switch until the first step. I pressed E-1 somewhere around 24, 25. So the other pattern modes are sustain and one-shot trigger. Sustain basically plays as long as you hold the key down for. So let me bring my musical typing keyboard in here just so you can see what I'm doing. With sustain mode, it only plays the pattern as long as I hold the key down for. So if I hold down C-1 and then I let go, it stops playing when I let go of that key. So I'll just show you that again. Just watch the key down here. And it stops it. And then what one-shot trigger does is it automatically stops before it plays the sequence again. So it's just going to play the pattern through once, and then it'll be up to you to press the next key on step 1. So that's pattern mode. I have used it live a couple times. I'm not really, I wouldn't really consider myself an electronic music performer, but I have used it live a couple times just to trigger drum patterns. And you can also record in this way. You can just hit record up here and hit R to record, and then just trigger. Just use your MIDI keyboard to trigger in what pattern you want in whatever order you want. So you can use it musically, just from a recording standpoint as well as a live standpoint. Honestly, I prefer just the drag and drop feature. Other things you can do in the sequencer before we move on to sampling is you can adjust how much swing you want. Just by pulling this up here, and it'll just basically take 8th notes and space them a little bit further, 16th notes and space them a little further, so you get a bit more of a swung sound. You can also change what the resolution of your pattern is. By default, it's 16th note, which means that each step is a 16th note. So if I want to take this whole pattern and double time it, I can change it to a 32nd note, and everything's going to play back twice as fast. Which can be kind of cool. Or half time it, I'll go down to 8th notes. Not very useful here. And if you have like a pattern that's got like a 12/8 or like a 6/8 or some sort of triplet feel, you can choose a 12th note, which is 8th note triplets, or a 1/24th note, which is 16th note triplets. You can choose a 12th note or 24th note grid. And with these grids, it splits each beat into 3 notes rather than 4 notes. So if you get like a 12/8 song or a 6/8 song or something like that, you can experiment with that. Okay, let's talk about Ultrabeat's sampling ability. I'm going to go ahead and save this preset because I want to keep these patterns and I want to come back to it later. So I'm just going to say save as, and I'll just call it Electro Bump episode 51. There we go. Ultrabeat, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's 3 things. It's a step sequencer, which we've gone over. It's a tone generator. It's a synthesizer, but it's also a sampler. So you're not necessarily stuck with the sounds that you get here. You can actually build your own custom kits just from samples you find on the internet or samples you buy or ones you make. So you can completely customize the sounds that are here, and you can also completely customize the synthesis of those notes that are here too. So you can take a preset kick drum, add a filter to it, or add a wobble effect with an LFO, or maybe layer another oscillator on top of it. So there's all sorts of things you can do to customize the sounds. To start, let's just start with its sampling abilities. What I always like to do with the Ultrabeat is to use the drag and drop samples kit, which is basically just a blank kit with no sounds in it, and it's up to you to drag in your own sounds. So to get to the drag and drop samples kit, you just go to drum kits and you go to drag and drop samples. And what it'll do is it'll give you basically a blank kit with nothing on it. I'm assuming that's just a visual glitch. I'm not really sure why that it should have nothing there. There we go. Yeah. Sometimes my screen capture software bugs out Logic more than Logic already is buggy. So basically what I have is just a blank kit, and you can see if I click on these, I'm not getting any sound because it's just a blank kit with no sounds in it. So what you can do with the drag and drop samples kit is it automatically initializes your synthesizer window here for sample input. And by the way, when you click on a new sample, like if I go to sample 2 here, this whole screen, it doesn't look like it right now because they're all initialized, but this whole screen switches. So essentially you have 25 different synthesizer screens for each voice. So you can add a filter to the kick drum, but maybe not add a filter to the snare drum. So let's find some samples. I like to go, like for free stuff, I always tell people to go to like sampleswap.org. They're a great free place to find samples or free sound. I happen to have, not an extensive, but I have a drum sample library that I use. I mostly work with acoustic drums and drum replacement, so most of what I have are acoustic drums, but let me find a few sounds here in my sample library. Let's use this one. Got a bunch of toms, kicks, and snares here. Let's say that I want C1 here to be a kick drum. So I just make sure that that voice is selected here and highlighted. And then I just grab the sample that I want to use for it. I'll use kick 8 here. Just drag it right in here. It'll highlight, let go of the mouse, and you'll see that, hey, there's our sample. And so now when I click on C1, we get that sample. You can also name the sample here. So I'm going to just double click on it and choose kick. And there we go. One of the important things about sampling drums is that you want your sounds to play as one-shots. A one-shot is basically just a sample that plays from beginning to end regardless of how long you hold the key down. The problem with our kick drum here at the moment, let me just do an add every downbeat. Get rid of some of them. And press play. Is that the sound is only, you can hear it's very cut off. We're not hearing the whole sound. We're not hearing the sound of the room as well. The sound is only playing as long as the gate is down here. So essentially I'd have to pull this all the way out in order to hear the whole sample. So in that first one, you can hear a little bit of the reverb and the echo from the room. That's a big pain to have to do that for every single note. So what you can do instead is you can go over to your envelope over here, and by default, it pulls up envelope number 4, which is tied to amplitude or amplifier, basically volume. And what you can do is you can take your envelope, grab the release time down here, and pull this all the way out. And what this will do is this will guarantee that up to 10 seconds, this sample will play completely on every single note, regardless of what the gate is. So I'm getting the full tail of my sample. Another thing that we can do is we can adjust the start point of the sample here. There's these max and minimum sliders. They have to do with maximum and minimum velocity. I want, and you can see there's a bit of a gap at the front of the sample there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my max slider right in front of the transient. And I'm going to pull the minimum slider a little bit further in. Something like that. I could have set them to the same point and it would have been fine, but what the max and min sliders do is they basically adjust the start point of the sample based on velocity. So if I have maximum velocity, 127, the sample is going to start here. With a lower velocity, like 50 or 60, the sample is going to start later on in the sample. So actually, I'm going to move this a little bit further. The advantage to this is that you can kind of soften a sample by not starting it right at the hard transient. So if I want to do something like this, let me just pull the velocities up here. And let me just do that, that, and that. There we go. So if I want something that does just kind of like a quick little kick, 16th note kick, something like this. These quick ones sound a little weird. They sound a little fake sounding because it's just like the same volume, the same presence, you know, twice in a row really quickly. if you pull the velocity down, normally that just adjusts the volume of the sample. But now that we have a minimum and maximum start point, these lower velocities, if I pull the velocities down, are actually going to sound slightly different than the max velocities. And I'm actually going to go ahead and pull the max up just a hair. There we go. And sometimes you have to play with it because sometimes you'll get a little like a little click in there. Let me just pull this. Actually, let me pull just pull it all the way down because it's minimum. Yeah, it's so quiet, it's not doing anything. Let me pull this forward a bit. So that velocity was 84. Just yeah, sure, we'll try that. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes you have to play with it because otherwise you'll get like a little click in the signal, which I really don't want because it's not going to sound very good. And you can also try adjusting the minimum slider up here. There we go. So these lower velocities, it took a little bit of tweaking, but these lower velocities are going to start later on in the waveform and give us sort of like a softened kick drum sound. You could also just put another kick drum in here on a separate note as well, and just make it, make it a different sample. You know, you could have a soft and a loud kick in the same instrument. All right, let's move on to the snare drum. On sample 5 here, I'm going to add my snare, and I'm going to use snare 7. Pull this in from my sample library. There we go. And for this, I'm just going to throw it on basically 2 and 4. Now for this, we're having the same problem we had before. We have a sample that is not a one-shot, and so we're only hearing a tiny portion of it. So what we have to do, again, is pull the release time all the way out on our 4th envelope.
I honestly do not know why I sat through this entire tutorial because it literally solved none of my problems. But I'm so deep in, what do I have, like 4 minutes? I'm going to finish it at this point. But all these things that you can do within this, like, sequence sampler, whatever, these things seem to be going onto different tracks. So as cool as Ultrabeat is, I do not think I will actually be using it.
All right, so give me a second. I'm going to off-screen this. I'm just going to go and find a few more samples, build a basic kit. I'm going to drag everything in, maybe adjust some of the panning and adjust some of the levels, build a basic pattern on it with that, and I'll be right back and just have that as a demonstration for you. All right, so we're back off screen. I just dragged in some new samples. I actually completely replaced the kick and the snare with different samples. I just decided I didn't like those samples. I added in an open hi-hat, a closed hi-hat, and also some just kind of synth hits. And so this is what I came up with. All right, so that's okay. One last thing I want to show you, because I'm going to have to end this video. This is going to end up being a 2-part video. It's going to have to be. It's just too long. But one last thing I want to show you is something called an exclusive group, or sometimes called a hi-hat group or a choke group. Let me just solo out my hi-hats here. And what you'll see is that, here, is that I have an open hat and then some closed hats. And it'll actually be even more apparent if I add hi-hats in more regularly on like an 8th note. And I'll do this same thing like here with an open hat. So I got something like this now. problem is this really isn't functioning like a real hi-hat, because when you have an open hi-hat, you open up the two cymbals and then you close it to play it closed, the open sound is choked by the closed sound. So what we need to do is we need to set up these two hi-hat sounds in a group that's a monophonic exclusive group, so where that group can only have one voice in it. It's very simple to do. What you do is you click on the first hi-hat, go over to here where it says group, and choose a group. I'm going to say group 1. And then you go over to your other hi-hat, and you put that hi-hat in the same group. So both of these hi-hats are now in an exclusive monophonic group, also known as a hi-hat or a choke group. So we end up with something like this. So the open hi-hat is choked by the closed hi-hat. And let's try this. I'll just vary the pattern just a little bit. Let's try this out with everything else. And there we go. All right, so that concludes this part of the video. I'll have to do a part 2 on Ultrabeat. In that video, we'll talk more about the kind of the synthesis elements. We might get a little deeper into how to mix with the Ultrabeat, especially the multi-output function. And if I have time, I'll also show the step mode as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.
I think I'm going to restart a stream in a minute here, guys. I'm going to leech off myself. Literally going to leech off myself. So, I don't know why this isn't automatically playing.
In a world where getting fewer features for the money has become commonplace, comes a most uncommon SUV, equipped with an available hands-free smart liftgate.
The other day I was driving in my car listening to Shade 45, and they had this playlist happening. It was all trap music, and in my opinion, they all sounded pretty much the same. I was driving for about 30 minutes, and all the tracks sounded the same. It sort of sparked an idea in my head to create a video on how every trap beat is basically made, in my opinion. Again, I don't want to generalize things. There are differences here and there, but for the most part, they all have the same groove and vibe. So let's get straight to it. First thing you want to do is set your tempo to a nice fast one, and we're going to set it to 150 beats per minute. And we're going to start off with our hi-hats, because the hi-hats are extremely important in trap music, and it kind of gives you that sort of that vibe that you're going for. Let's go ahead and create a 4-bar region, and we're going to go in and draw in those hi-hats. Make sure my brush tool is selected. We're going to start with 1/8 notes, and let's go ahead and just paint those in. So some trap producers just put that in and call it a day. But let's go ahead and spice things up a little bit. We'll do a couple stutters here and there. I'm just going to go ahead and just randomly put stutters in. And we'll put another stutter over here. Let's put another stutter over here. And we'll put another stutter to end off this pattern. All right, so now that we have our hi-hats, let's go over to our kick. We're going to create another 4-bar pattern. And we're going to go ahead and draw in our kick pattern. Now the kick is extremely important as well, because it gives you that bounce that you want in sort of mumble rap trap music. So here we go. So right there, we got that balance that we're looking for in this genre of music. All right, so let's go ahead over to our 808 track. Now we are using Logic's ES2 plugin, and we're using the popular 808 preset that we like to use on this channel. So let's go ahead and just create a 4-bar pattern. And this 808 is essentially going to follow the kick pattern. Actually, we can even keep it simpler and just copy this down. And we're just going to stretch out our 808s. Maybe not this last one over here, because we want this one to be stretched out. And then we're going to get a little bit fancy here, and we're going to pitch up or put in another note here to get a nice slide or 808 glide right there at the end of our loop. All right, so let's go ahead over to our snare track and put in some snares, because what's a trap beat without some snares? Let's just go find that snare. All right, so we're going to use that one right there. All right, now we're starting to feel that vibe that we're going for. Let's go ahead and draw in a clap. Once again, a 4-bar pattern. And let's go ahead and find where this guy is here. We're essentially just going to put it right under our snare sound. So that clap is meant to layer up that snare. So every time it hits on the 3, you get a little bit of a different sound as opposed to those ghost notes over here. So there's a clap, ghost note, clap. All right, next let's go ahead and draw in our open hat, as this once again is pivotal to that sort of bounce and groove vibe that we're going for. All right, next what we got to do is add in another bass, and we're going to use that classic Drake Mo bass right here. And for that sound, we're using Logic's ES2 synthesizer. If you want to learn how to make this Mo bass from scratch, you can click the card in the top right-hand corner of this video. But for now, let's go ahead and just draw in one single sustained note that creates tension in the track, and we're just going to draw it in right here. And we're just going to sustain that for the entire loop pattern. It just gives you that subtle tension that something's about to happen. Right. Last but not least, let's go ahead and round this up with a bell sound. What is trap music without those bells? You gotta have those bells no matter what kind of trap producer you are. So let's go ahead and draw in a 4-bar pattern. The plugin that we'll be using for our bell sound is Logic's stock plugin called Sculpture. They have some cool bell sounds that work well for trap music. All I did was add in some reverb, and